Thank you very much. Okay, so as introduced, Dieter Van Uytvanck from the CLARIN ERIC. I think I have a slightly different context about text and data mining than as we have had it so far today, but I hope it can contribute a bit to the richness of the whole discussion and maybe put on some other perspectives on situation with regard to data mining. Okay, so first of all, what is CLARIN? CLARIN used to be a S3 project, is currently an official ERIC, or European Research Infrastructure Consortium, and it stands for Common Language Resources and Technology Infrastructure. The basic aims of CLARIN are providing easy and sustainable access for scholars in the humanities and the social sciences, so it's quite a broad target audience, to digital language data. And that's not only text, it could be written, spoken, video material, multimodal form, so with all kind of sensors for instance, following the gestures of a speaker. And also to provide these kind of advanced tools to discover, explore, exploit, annotate, analyze, and combine them. And of course, it goes without saying that these advanced tools are quite often based on data mining and text mining. The whole infrastructure is set up as a distributed infrastructure, which basically means that there are centers with a specific expertise all over Europe. Currently, we have about 20 center candidates there, 9 officially recognized of them. They're all in the process of being built up. And they are providing these services in a kind of transparent way to the end users. So you can just log in with your web browser, go to a specific service, download a corpus, a resource, process that, and do some analysis on that resource. For more information, you can go to the website clarin.eu. But then coming to the real content of this talk, so language resources. I already mentioned it, it's not only about text. So language resources come in a wide variety of let's say, perspectives. And first of all is modality. So of course there is text, the written text, that goes from let's say the forum articles you find these days on the website, over newspaper corpora over, for instance, the last 30 years. But there are also other modalities. There is, of course, spoken language. So, for instance, you could think of video, of sound recordings from radio broadcasts. And in addition to that, there is also a lot of video material available, for instance, for sign language. So some of our centers are hosting large corpora of signed language, which of course comes with its own challenges to analyze this kind of data and to annotate that. And then there's also the additional channels. So for instance, in this picture, which was taken at our institute, some psycholinguistic experiment is done with people being monitored with the EEG system. But nowadays also more sophisticated systems like fMRI and other neuroscanning devices are being used, and the grand challenge is to combine all this information. So you have a person speaking, thinking, he sees a picture, has to recognize that word and has to pronounce the sounds that make up that word. So bringing together all these processes, all this information is really one of the large challenges, and it's also something where data mining can play a very useful role, of course. Another perspective on the data, or other dimension, so to say, is location, of course. So we're within CLARIN, we're hosting data from all over the world. That includes some very remote corners up the Amazon River area, or for instance here you see a researcher at our institute who is doing research on sign language on the Isle Bali in Indonesia. But at the same time, it's not only about physical location. As I already said, it's also about the internet era. So we're speaking about data coming from the World Wide Web, the people creating data on their smartphones, SMS messages, whatever. It all counts as language resources, and it has to be processed, analyzed, and some very interesting research can be done on that, especially because of the dynamics, of course. It already has been mentioned today with these kind of sentiment analysis, and so you can very easily get an idea about what kind of dynamics are taking place in society. There's the time dimension, of course. The material we're hosting goes from very old historic collections, the medieval charters, but even older hieroglyphs, manuscripts, rock carvings, some characters written on vases and things like that. It's all in there. Often OCRs are recognized. The characters are tried to be recognized or digitized to be made processable with software. And as already mentioned, so it goes to up really at this moment. If you're Twittering now, your Twitter tweets could be analyzed in real time. And then finally, the dimension of origin, of course. Although there is, of course, quite some elicited data, so people really being in an experiment setting, being asked, for instance, some interview questions, trying to get some specific pronunciation of a specific word. This data does exist, but of course, if you look at the whole range of language data, most data basically is found in the wild. People are talking all the day, are writing, and even when they don't have the idea that they will produce something that can be studied by linguists, for instance, it is a fact that most of that material can be very useful for research. Okay, so then about data mining. If you look at the whole field of, let's say, linguistic processing over the last 20, 30 years, there is a very large paradigm shift where linguistics and analysis of languages used to be very much a rule-based thing. So for instance, the grammars or phonetic systems were all defined by, let's say, made-up rules which were applied one after the other. If you look at the whole field over the last years, there is a shift towards data-driven analysis. It means that you basically put a lot of existing language material into software. The software basically is trained to recognize certain patterns into that, and then manages to recognize certain things. Manages, for instance, to make a grammatical analysis of a sentence. And it has turned out that it's a very efficient way of doing this kind of processing, and it's generally overclasses in many dimensions the rule-based system. So therefore, this data mining has become extremely important in the whole field. This doesn't only go for text, but also, for instance, for multimedia. So you could think about a computer being trained to recognize the individual words being spoken by someone in a sound recording, or gesture analysis, automatic analysis of who is pointing to what. The computer can all learn it. Supposed you can train it and you can give it enough information to recognize in the initial state what's going on. And therefore there is an extreme large importance for the whole research community to have access to the primary data, especially also when working together on specific research project or replicating experiments. It's very important to have access to the whole works, because these whole works need to be fed into the data mining algorithm so that a smart recognition system can be created on the computer. And often snippets are just not enough, or individual sentences. So the access to whole works is very important. And next to that, of course, the replication of experiments and replication of data mining is a very important thing. Unfortunately, over the last year, some very public cases of scientific fraud have come up. And to tackle things like that, you really have to be, and also, of course, to make sure that collaboration is working well and some critics can be given among scientific colleagues, it's very important to replicate these experiments. So therefore, there are from the part of the research infrastructure, there are some technical handles to support this kind of replication of experiments. For instance, there is the concept of a virtual collection, basically a kind of digital bookmark which points to an arbitrary amount of resources that can, for instance, be found online, so that it afterwards can be reused, that it can be cited in a publication, and that other colleagues could do something with it. But apart from that, there is absolutely also a need for a safe legal setting for the researchers, so that they don't have to look into the dirty details of signing licenses for 500,000 texts that they have automatically collected off websites. And this is not a theoretical case. We have plenty of colleagues who are doing this on a daily basis, who are doing research on texts gathered from all over the internet. And they are quite a few times they tell me that they have literally sleepless nights, because they're very scared of being taken into court for instance, copyright infringement or things like that. While at the same time, this is really a daily practice within the language processing community to do such mass analysis. Okay, some very short examples to demonstrate the variation in the nature of data mining that is based on language resources. First of all, this is actually a very interesting study from 2012 based on the very large scanned book material from Google. This is typically a huge data mining example. So you throw in well, I think it's not millions, but at least tens of thousands of books, and then you start looking at language use and at specific trends. And some interesting outcome they have found was that in the English-speaking, I think it's the blue line here, in the English-speaking area, the periods of war are basically times when a lot of new words appear in a language, probably because new concepts need to be named, and so, okay, thank you. And so these are the kind of things that you can find out of the textual material, and that can only be done with computers, obviously, because there's so much information that you really need some automatic processing. Thing here, something that we have at our institute, at the Ovis project, is basically recognizing of gestures. So before people had to manually annotate this kind of visual information, which was really time consuming. Now there are algorithms which are being trained and which help a researcher to annotate this information and to work in the end much faster in doing analysis of visual information. There's this stylometry is also a very interesting thing. I can advise the websites which are up there trying to find out if text has been written by one or multiple authors. There's some historic examples, like for instance the text and the songs of Hildegard van Bingen are thought of being written by different authors. With the data mining, you can basically try to filter out these authors and try to point who has written which text fragment. And a final example here, also from one of the colleagues at our institute, is the language evolution analysis. So basically what you do, you throw in a lot of information about languages. For instance, what is the order of the verb, the subject, and the object, or do the adjectives come before or after the nouns? And then you let the computer use some very sophisticated algorithms, phylogenetic trees it's called. The colleagues from biology and so will probably recognize it. But basically what you can do is try to find out which language is evolved from which other language group. So you can try to find somehow a computer-based view on the origin of languages and of language families. Okay, so what is the role of the research infrastructure in the whole story? Well, first of all, it's very important to have access to the data set. So what we try to do as CLARIN is to assure long-term preservation with repositories where researchers can store their data, making them citable with a persistent identifier, so that be it on a website or in a paper article, you can refer to that very data set, and making the access easier with federated login. Whenever you need to log in with a username and a password, make sure that you can do it with your own institutional credentials. We're also trying to lower the threshold of using the advanced software. It has been said in the previous presentation also. Sometimes it can be very difficult to configure machine learning software or to use it in a specific way. We try to make that at least a bit more transparent by offering web service change or web front ends for that. And whenever there are very heavy computation tasks, for instance with video recognition and so, we have cooperations with some of the large computing centers which have enormous supercomputers running, for instance, to do calculations and analysis. And then finally there is also a pillar of know-how, building and support. Of course it's very important to let researchers know that these tools and resources are out there. Give them support with technical matters that come up, and of course, as we are here today, try to support them with the legal issues. We've tried to classify the whole world of language resources out there in three easy categories. First of all is academic, which means full access, so no restrictions. An example for that could be the parallel corpora from the European Parliament. So it's all the minutes and so are multilingual, so they actually are a very interesting resource, for instance, to train automatic translation algorithms. Then the second category is the academic category, meaning all resources available to the whole academic community with no individual difference. An example of that is the corpus of spoken Dutch, a large corpus containing spoken Dutch, as it says. And then a final category is restricted, and that's actually everything more restricted than the academic category. For instance, and that comes with personalized access rule, like really some rules saying, okay, researcher X can access this file and researcher Y can access that file. For the others, there's no access. And an example of that could be a video from doctor-patient interaction, which of course is very sensitive. Oh, sorry. No, there's something went wrong. So academic, public, academic, restricted. Yes, apparently something. Yeah. Okay. Well, ignore the icons. It's about the text. Apparently something went wrong with it. Then, okay. So the legal perspective on resources, and I'll try to be a bit quicker there. So we recommend in general for new resources. So new resources that are created Creative Commons licenses, as that is the least problematic in the long run. For older material, and there is quite a lot of older material out there, we try to distribute them as freely as can be negotiated in these categories that we have mentioned. And then, of course, there is quite some older resources out there and also new resources out there which are quite restricted, so for which there is really individual access rights to be given. It's not only about copyright, so we also have issues with personal data, as you can imagine. There are also all kind of ethical perspectives. How do you ask for permission to publish something on the internet if the person being recorded has never seen a computer? All kind of things that are really daily practice that we encounter. Okay, and so then from the technical perspective, so I already went over these categories, so I'll skip this. So the public, the academic, and the restricted categories are playing an important role. We have a kind of technical way of ensuring that the resources which are really restricted, either be it for academics or for individual researchers, can be accessed from using the username and the password from your own university or academic institute. It's called Federated Identity Management. I won't go into the details, but it means that it makes logging in a bit less cumbersome than it sometimes used to be. You don't need to create a new account. You can use your own institutional credentials. Coming to the future perspective, so as we in CLARIN are capable for the non-open resources of identifying researchers and protecting the resources from the other users. CLARIN has in that respect already the technical prerequisites in place for implementing a broad research exception in the EU, such as the one which is already in place in the Netherlands. And coming then to the conclusion, data mining plays an increasingly important role. That's very obvious. Research infrastructures try to assist academics, but to make efficiently use of those resources and tools out there. Many technical issues have been addressed or are being addressed. So for instance, this easy authentication of users. And we hope that the remaining legal, for instance, copyright issues can be addressed by a research exception or something like fair use. At least I would like to say to those researchers that come to me and tell they have sleepless nights that there is something that is going to address their problems in that respect, so that they can do their research with some rest of mind in that respect. I think that brings me to the end of the presentation, so thank you.
Okay, some questions for Dieter. Oh, yeah, Christoph.
Christoph Bruch-Helmholtz Associate. Actually, it's not a question, it's a remark, because at the beginning you mentioned that you annotate the text. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, is very helpful, because that way the text or the data become more useful for other scientists. Mm-hmm. Now, what is important here is that from a copyright point of view, this annotation could be viewed as a derivative. Mm-hmm. So that's an issue we really have to look at, that we don't get into a legal, or if it needs to be changed, that we change a legal situation, that we don't get into a situation where adding to a content is forbidden by law. That would be a real problem.
I thought we were trying to solve the sleepless nights instead of adding to it. But
yeah, technically speaking, should I speak? Yeah. So technically speaking, there are two kinds of annotations. There is indeed the inline annotation where you really add something. There is also the possibility of having a standoff annotation, which basically creates something completely independent, but basically pointing to the original. But conceptually, of course, the problem is very important because, as you said, in creating annotations and also in some of the other steps of the whole process, there is indeed sometimes thing where you have a derivation of the original works, and it can be potentially problematic.
okay, thank you. Last question.
Hello, my name is Natalia Manola from the University of Athens and representing the project Open Air. I have a question about the research infrastructure, the role. Is a lot of what you said is to support academics. You're dealing with lots of data and lots of services. Have you dealt with about how commercial companies would be able to take advantage of what you're doing? Because this is publicly funded research and the licenses, they are more towards the academics and the researchers using the data and the services. How about commercial?
Our primary aim as research infrastructure is serving the academic community. On the longer term, however, we are thinking about setting up or at least trying to investigate certain business models and ways of cooperation with let's say the commercial world. So thoughts are being made about that, but within this context so far, I've tried to focus mainly on the academic world, as the situation there is already quite complex, and I think it would be even more complex if we go that step further of looking into commercial usages. For certain resources, there are also dual licenses, which means that, for instance, academics can use a certain data collection for free, while the industry can buy a license to use a specific set. It's fairly complicated, and you're absolutely right in that. That's even a further dimension, which is at this part.
But my question is, would the commercial or the academic people buy the license to data or to the services?
Well, both could be possible. You could buy, if you would have in the first place, let's say, such a license in place. It depends a bit. We have quite a lot of resources and tools, so it ranges from completely free and open source to indeed limited. And there, some of the resources and some of the tools are available under a commercial license, and that goes for the tools and for the data. So it's for both, actually.